Hey guys, welcome to Tech Talk by Netranom, a podcast where you will learn tips and tricks on managing your IT. I'm your host, Alina Atkins, with my co-host, Paul Page. Let's get started. So October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and today's topic is extremely important. It goes hand in hand with cybersecurity, and that is ransomware.
Yeah.
So, Paul, can you give us a brief description of what ransomware is?
So, Alina, ransomware has been around for a long time. Our first variant that we had was back in 1989. It's been around since. There's been a little law there up into 2005, but it's been strong since probably around that time. So what ransomware does, it actually locks up all of your files and makes it so that you can't access that data that you have, either on your computer, your tablet, your phone, whatever the device may be. Essentially encrypts that data and makes it so it's unretrievable until you get a decryption key from the threat actor. That's typically what it is.
Wow. Okay. So going with that, entry points. Entry points are mainly emails, email links, and what have you seen is kind of the most prominent entry point that these hackers tend to use to get information?
Yeah. So the biggest one, when we're talking about entry point, that's that first part of the attack that happens when we're looking at the attack vector. The entry point could be the phishing email, like a link. There could be a link within that phishing email. You click on that link, it takes you to a website or a page on the internet that downloads that package or that ransomware. It could be remote desktop protocol, things like LogMeIn and TeamViewer and other things that are used to get remote access to our machines. It could be a vulnerability in that. It could be that you have a compromised website. You go to a website link and that's actually a downloader link.
Right.
And it starts that downloading process and activates the payload again as well. So entry points are that first area where that's going to happen. And then of course, once that happens, if we're going to talk about the whole attack,
Right.
the next thing that typically is going to happen is that dropper, what we refer to as a dropper or Trojan, that virus, that package is going to be put on that machine. From there, once it's activated, it could give that threat actor access to the machine. So he's going to do things like create a user or elevate the privileges of the user that he's logged in as. He's going to do things like create a backdoor. He's going to do what we refer to as provide persistence. So he has access to that machine at that time and then later as well. He doesn't want just access for that time. He wants to be able to come back and get back on there in case you figure out that he's doing something and you block that. Let's say you change your password for remote desktop protocol. He can't get in that way, but he created this back door over here
So he can
with his
keep
teamvert. So
coming
he can
in.
keep getting back in. So
Yeah.
that's what they'll do second, once they have the entry. Then they're going to recon. They're going to look at not only that machine, they're going to look for all the essential data or the assets, the digital assets on that machine. And they're going to look over the whole network. They're going to look for any servers. You may have file servers. You could have application servers. You could have a lot of workstations that have financial data or health data or something of that nature. They're going to look for all of those things within the network. And then once they do their recon, then that's when they're going to steal the data, right? They're not going to encrypt it yet. They're not going to ransom and encrypt it yet. They're going to steal that data to make sure that they have it first before they encrypt it. So think of it as you're a medical practice and they steal 25,000 of your medical records of all your patient data, or you're a manufacturing facility and they steal your CNC data so that they can make that part or steal that trade secret. So they're looking for all that, then they steal it. Then they go ahead and encrypt your data. They lock it all up so that you can't access it no more. You can't run your manufacturing lines. You can't operate your medical practice. You can't do your financial work. Everything is kind of locked up in this encrypted state. Yeah. And once they do that, then the final piece of that is the negotiation. That's where they contact you. They're going to contact you. They're going to provide a phone number for you to call, or they may just start chatting with you on your device and say, hey, I noticed we've got your stuff locked up. It's going to be $300,000 to unlock your data to get it back. That's kind of how that process works from start to finish.
Yeah, that's crazy. And you had mentioned like $300,000.
Yeah.
What is typically, how do they determine how much money that they're going to ask for?
It depends. In the old days, it was just a flat fee. Like the one that came out in 1998, Joseph Popp, he was a evolutionary biologist at Harvard, decided to write this virus, send these floppy disks to 20,000 people that attended a World Health Organization when they were talking about AIDS in that time. He sends them these floppy disks, they put that in there. It waits for you to reboot your machine 90 times and then tells you you have to send a check to a post office box in Panama for $189. So that kind of started it off.
That was like a flat fee.
Flat fee for
everyone.
$189 at that time. And then we got to 2005 up to 2013. WannaCry came out. That was $300 per infection. So no matter if you were Target or if you were Joe Schmo down the road, you were going to pay $300 to get your data back. Nowadays, they become more sophisticated. They target you. They research your company before they ask you for that money. And during that process, when they were getting your data, remember I said they steal your data before they encrypt it? They find out how important that data is and see that, they can make estimates and assumptions of how much you would be willing to pay to get that data back. If it's your health records and they got 25,000 of them and the fine is $25,000 per record, you can see how that adds up really quick and how they can convince you to go ahead and pay them the money so that they don't release all those health records to the public. So those are the kind of things that we kind of look at once that happens.
Yeah, we had talked about prior to this how encryption and encrypting, we do that here. We take our information and we encrypt it so in case a hacker were wanting to get our information, they can't decode that.
Correct.
But it also is kind of like a catch-20 of they can also use that against us.
They do.
So encrypting our information, once they steal it, they encrypt it to where the user, the owner of that information cannot decrypt it unless they have that code from the hacker.
Exactly.
Which is terrifying because they're stealing your information, and I feel like we typically think of a hacker as some guy with a hoodie on his computer, the background is dark and it's just all darkness there. Yeah. But it's actually companies. This is a business that people do. And that you're calling an 800 number and they're saying, well, we see that we have your information and this is what you're going to owe. And to me, that is mind-blowing that this is actually a business.
Yeah.
So what are the early stages that small to medium-sized business owners can look at to see, am I about to have a ransomware attack? Is somebody kind of behind the scenes trying to attack my company?
Yeah. So just getting back to what you were talking about, their businesses, there's franchises now too. So you can actually own your own ransomware franchise. So, there's everybody involved that's got their hands in this, from franchisees, state agencies, terrorist organizations. Everybody's kind of involved in that ransomware. So it really is a tough battle out there nowadays to stay ahead of all of these threat actors that are out there nowadays. Talking about early stages, some of the things that you're going to recognize, it's going to be hard for the end user to see a lot of these things happening because these threat actors are taking these sophisticated approaches, and they've recognized in the past. In the old days when you would get a virus, your machine may slow down and start acting really weird. You're going to notice these performance issues. Today, that's not necessarily so true. So what I would say, if you're a business owner, you should have somebody monitoring your systems for you, because it's going to be very difficult for the end user to recognize that they've actually been compromised. We may see things like account creations, like, how many times do you, Alina, go in and look at your users in your computer and see if a user is created? Not often, right?
Right.
So you're not going to recognize that. Elevating user privileges, you're not typically going to see that happen. Failed login attempts, that you may see. You may see some failed login attempts where somebody's been trying to get into your Outlook or get into one of your websites. Those kind of things you might see. You can see things like endpoint protection disabled in most cases. You'll see your little shield there has a line through it, and you notice, I wonder why my antivirus isn't working. So that's one thing that could kind of pop up for you. Sometimes we see some system performance affected. Very rare. Our computers are so powerful nowadays.
Yeah.
A lot of times that performance degradation is not going to be recognizable to the eye. You're not going to recognize it. Remote tools installed is one other thing that you can look for. A lot of these threat actors, once they gain access, they create themselves another backdoor, another way to get into your machine. That could be things like LogMeIn or TeamViewer or one of the other remote technologies that we have. So those kind of things you can look for. But really, you need to have somebody monitoring your stuff and looking for these things that are happening in a state where it's going to send alerts to the engineers of your IT team to take action.
Yeah. And I've noticed too, just with like on a personal side, when if I log on to a new device with my Gmail, it will send me a notification that's like, hey, new login attempt. So I think that that's great.
That's monitoring.
Yeah, that they're monitoring. And then if that was me, I can say, oh yeah, that was me, you know, ignore it. But if it isn't, then like I need to take some type of action for that. So we've talked kind of about the real cost of a ransomware attack, but when companies actually get hit, why is it so hard for them to recover?
So, you know, business impact is going to be different for all the different businesses out there. A lot of things you have to consider: your reputation, your current agreements. You could have financial data. You could have all that information out there. So you really want to. We talked about this before, Alina, having a business impact analysis done to find out how much that'll cost you if you get hit with ransomware. Real important to have that. But when we're looking at, you know, I think your question was recovery. Why is it so hard to recover? There's a lot of things that are involved when we're encrypting machines. You had mentioned earlier, when the data is encrypted, the threat actor has this encryption key that allows him to decrypt the data. Well, that's half of the pie. The other half is your machine that has been encrypted also has a key on it. Those two keys have to work together to unlock your data.
You have to work with
You
the
have
hacker.
to work with the hacker to get their decryption code. Essentially, you'll give them Bitcoin. You'll go to an ATM, Bitcoin ATM, buy a bunch of Bitcoin, send it over to their account. They get the Bitcoin, and then they're going to give you this long list of alphanumeric numbers that's going to be your decryption key. And depending on what methods they use, RSA, EAS, it's going to be a big key. That key has identifiers in there that match the key that you have on your machine. If for some reason something is off just a little bit, guess what? Your data is not getting encrypted. In the old days, what used to happen is we would go in and try to fix the ransomware and the viruses. And when you did that, it deleted the decryption key on your machine. You're never going to give your data back, even if you use the threat actor's data encryption key. So nowadays, it's really hard to recover. So you can have incomplete recovery, where not all of your files decrypt properly. Some may become corrupted.
Oh, wow.
You could be susceptible to repeat attacks. Extortionware. Remember I told you one of those phases is they steal your data before they encrypt it. They come back 6 months later after you paid the ransomware and say, hey, by the way, I've got all of your health records. We're going to release them to the public unless you pay us another $100,000. So that's another reason they don't recover well. Corrupt or ineffective backups. So we have to nowadays have these backups that are immutable, that aren't susceptible to ransomware and other malware that's out there. Real important. Your backup strategy, your business continuity disaster recovery plan has to be right in today's world.
Yeah, and that's so scary, because what stops them after you pay the ransom? Say it's $300,000. What stops them from keeping it, or sending it out to the public?
Right.
They can threaten and say, well, if you don't send us this money, we're going to release all of this information, which is maybe if you're a hospital, your patient's medical information. They're threatening this, but even after you pay the ransom, what stops them? Yeah, you might get it back. What stops them from keeping a copy of it and sending it out?
Nothing at that point. Once they have those digital assets in their hands, you're in trouble at that point, because, like you said, they can come back and extort you later. And we know, healthcare, that's a big one. That's $25,000 per record. So if they get 100,000 records from a hospital, you can see how that fine would maybe convince those leaders of that hospital to go ahead and pay the ransom.
Right.
Which doesn't mean, or the extortion, that does not mean that they're still not going to release it. So there is no foolproof about this. Obviously, we're dealing with criminals, so that's the world we're in.
And so I think that shows it shows how important, even more so, it is to have that proactive approach to say, like you had mentioned, the business impact analysis. Okay, if We do, and you've always mentioned too, it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when this happens.
Correct.
How we can manage this, but also making sure having your employees have security awareness training so that way it doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen as frequently, I should say, that they're clicking on these phishing links, that they're able to notice when something is happening and having monitoring as well. And I had spoken with our cybersecurity operations manager, Dawn, and we had talked about this and how important it is to have these backups and to have everything aligned in place in case something like this were to happen. And so what would you say is the very first thing if a business suspects that they have been attacked? What is the first thing that they should do?
So depending on the IT staff that you have there, you definitely need to be talking with an IT company if you do not have that in place. So if you're kind of taking care of your own IT assets, you need to call a professional right away. You need to call somebody that has access to a security operations center, a company or a vendor that is familiar with remediation practices, how to look for those backdoors that might have been created and the other payloads that might have been distributed throughout your network. So it's real important to contact somebody that has familiarity and experience and expertise with ransomware and those types of attacks.
Yeah, and when I was speaking with Dawn, he had mentioned to not pay the ransom, because and how important it is to not pay the ransom, which makes sense. That's why you need to seek professional help, because if we continue to pay these hackers money,
it propagates it.
And so it's extremely important if you have or if you ever do get attacked by ransomware, do not pay the ransom. Call a professional, an IT professional, and seek help and guidance through that. And so the last question I have for you, Paul, about this is, what is the single most effective thing a business can do today to avoid falling victim to ransomware?
Alina, I'd love to give you the single most effective thing, but it can't be a single thing. In today's world, it has to be a multi-level approach. You're going to have to do those things like making sure your updates are done, monitoring your networks, your workstations, your phones, all of your data. Everything has to be monitored. You're going to have to do that security awareness training with all of your staff members. You're going to have to implement things, policies and procedures like multi-factor. That's a big thing nowadays for your email and your other applications and even your computer access to have it multi-factor. That really does make it harder for these threat actors to gain access to your stuff when you're doing the multi-factor. So it's real important. Managed detection response, managed endpoint detection response, all of these layers have to be added today to keep us safe from that ransomware that's out there and these threat actors that they're very well educated, sophisticated in their attack methods, and they're very well funded because we're funding them. Right. So that's why we've got to that security awareness training is an important part, but you have to do all of the other things as well. Yeah.
And I think it's important, like you had mentioned before, is the monitoring. This is their full-time job, typically. This is what they're doing.
It is.
So you already have a job.
You do.
You're working 40 plus hours a week. You need somebody to be monitoring that. You can't do all of this yourself, and so you need to have some type of company or an IT department that is monitoring this, so that way when they try to attack, you have somebody on the background saying, hey, we've noticed this on the back end.
Absolutely. And so they can take action immediately, block that IP address or block that payload from being delivered to your network, all those things that an IT company, what we refer to as a security operations center, would be looking for.
Right.
They are looking for those threats to happen before they actually deliver the payloads.
Yeah, and that's that proactive approach.
It is the proactive approach that you have to have today.
Yep. Well, Paul, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, this is October, so it's a Halloween scary month.
Cybersecurity awareness.
Cybersecurity goes hand in hand with that.
Does.
So thank you again for being with us, and hopefully our audience has learned a little bit about ransomware and how scary it is, but also how we can take a proactive approach.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
Alrighty, thank you everyone, and we'll see you at our next podcast.